So, welcome everyone to the Leadership Lounge. We've got an exciting group of guests here for our Leadership Lounge looking at the power of pause. I'd like to introduce you to my guests. I'm delighted that we've gone back to some socially distanced face-to-face Leadership Lounge podcast this time. And I want to introduce my guests. We've got Lauren Meadows, who's the founder of Greenfields Education, and Ben Land, the founder of Ben Land Media. So we've got two founders here amongst us for our podcast. So I just want to introduce each one of them to our guests. So let's start with Lauren. So Lauren, you're the founder of Greenfields Education. What is it that you do?
I am, and I'm very privileged to do so. So my role is that I'm Director of Education at Greenfields, and I lead a team of 14 brilliant consultants. Our work is predominantly supporting schools and national portfolio organisations with how to develop great curriculum and assessment practices, and also supporting individuals with how to improve their own kind of knowledge and understanding of education.
Brilliant. So plenty to do there.
One or two things.
Yeah, and so we're going to explore with you kind of what you've been up to, but also how we can utilise and how you utilise the power of pause. So Ben Land, founder of Ben Land Media. So what is that all about, Ben?
Well, I realised I loved telling stories, especially stories that created some sort of impact. So whether it's something that inspires you, inspires change, inspires you to do something differently, or just something that creates a different emotion. I just loved being able to do that in various ways. So I thought, well, hey, why not start a video company? That's what I did, and I love it. Yeah,
brilliant. And it's fantastic to have you two with us. And we've kind of formed. This is our December edition, and so what we wanted to do was just to get a group of people together that had connection, and we're all connected to everyday leaders. So Ben, you do the media for us. You help us with social media, and then Lauren, you and I have worked together over many years.
Too many years.
But we also partner on some projects. And kind of you help us out as a consultant as well as one of our associates. So I thought we'd get together a team where we know each other a bit and just talk through our years, but also just reflect on the topic for this month, which is the power of pause. And it has been a busy year, hasn't it, for all of us?
That.
Yeah. But kind of what have you achieved this year in 2020?
So 2020 has in fact been our busiest year, and in the face of real disruption to the way that we've had to work, we remodelled very early on. So I had a sort of slightly weird weekend of pause, if you like, as we went into the first lockdown, where conferences were cancelled, school visits were cancelled, visits to London to go and work with various organisations were cancelled. And I had a couple of good writing projects that I thought would see me through the summer, and I thought I might take my foot off the pedal for a little while. And after my weekend of pause, I had a phone call from the CEO of one of the academy trusts that we work with saying, I know you don't usually do this, Lauren, but would you consider? And from that moment on, my phone rang continuously for the entire week, and we have been booked solid all the way through. And this autumn, we've actually just been commissioned to write a really new, exciting curriculum project, which is taking a significant proportion of our time and energies. So it's been a really busy year, but it had the potential to not be. So every day I am deeply thankful for those that we partner with and for the work that we do.
Yeah, so that ability to just pivot, I think that was a word that everyone was using, wasn't it? But you paused, pivoted, we probably need another, and planned maybe, there you go, 3 Ps, and just adapted what you did to different contexts, and you've been busy ever since. That's fantastic. Yeah, brilliant. Ben, what about you? You work in the media industry, and that probably had the biggest hit. How have you found things? Have you had a busy year?
No, in a word. Yeah, so it was a funny year. It 2020 initially, before kind of everything got cancelled, was meant to be the year where everything starts to snowball. So I had quite a few weddings booked. I think I had 15, and then I had lots of kind of music festivals and events and things like that booked, which of course all got cancelled. So for me, it's been a very different year to what it looked like, but quite a helpful one, because it's made me just think about, okay, I can't do what I was hoping to do, but I still need to run a business. So it made me kind of think and reflect on what I could be doing instead, to try and bring in that income. So I've had enough work, but it definitely could have been busier.
Yeah. It's interesting. I remember, I think it was something like the 23rd of March when the sort of announcements happened, and I've renamed that Andrew's liver salts day, because if you're old enough to know, Andrew's liver salts is a diuretic that flushes you through, and I just saw my diary empty literally on that one day, and we both talked about we've had to kind of change and reflect and move, haven't we, in 2020, and adapt and think about how can I work things differently. But yeah, real challenges of 2020, like I think a lot of our listeners will have had as well. And our kind of topic today is just around the power of pause, and actually for each of us we've probably had to have those moments of stop and pause and reflect, but I want us to explore in our podcast today more than just perhaps the immediate thought of what the power of pause is and pressing pause is all about, and I want us to look at some of the benefits, but the different types of pause that we can have. And 2020, with its, I suppose there's several lockdowns, we've had these forced moments of pause, haven't we, for some of us, and perhaps many of our listeners too. And I mean, Lauren, you touched on this a little bit. You talked about that weekend of pause. So have you used those forced moments of pause for anything, for reflection? I mean, how have you?
Yeah, so there's been a couple of really interesting pause moments, if you like. And the first was that weekend, and it was really pivotal for us because firstly I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that what we were going to do, and as much as Ben said, we had a very full year that looked very different to how it's ended up. What we were going to do wasn't going to happen, and I sort of had to come to terms with that. And then in that moment, you have a decision to make about the way that you're going to proceed. And you can either, I think, proceed in despair or proceed in hope. And for me, very much proceeding in hope and proceeding with hope epitomised how the year played out. Steve Chalk says there's two kind of defining questions. He says, who are we and who are we becoming? And I suppose what I used that weekend for was to ask those questions, not potentially as long term as I might have done, but certainly for the foreseeable future. Who are we and who do we need to become?
Yeah, absolutely. So actually 2020, with all the things that COVID has thrown at us, we've had to rethink, who am I in this moment, in this situation? And actually, whether it's 2020 and we're reflecting on it now, or whatever 2021 might throw at us, who knows what that could be now that we've experienced 2020. It is that ability, isn't it, to say, in what I'm currently facing, who am I and what do I need to become? And that pause moment being really important for that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So the second pause moment for us was September began. We had a number of consultants working face-to-face in school. In fact, we still do. We have a number of really great national portfolio projects going on, which necessitate some face-to-face contact. And so we began again in earnest. And it very quickly became apparent that it wasn't going to be long-term that we could continue with that. And so the kind of second moment of pause for me was when both kind of schools started to close, either bubbles or in its entirety, and we realised that it wasn't potentially safe for us to ask consultants to go and work in other areas of the country. And so at that point, you have another kind of moment of pause where you decide how you're going to proceed. And you can proceed in hope or you can proceed in despair. And so our second remodelling came just before the second national lockdown. And not unequivocally, but almost unequivocally, most of our work is remote now and it's delivered remotely. But it's required a different approach because, of course, the schools that we're working with have children back in them. And so the way that we have to engage with those schools schools has become different.
Yeah.
And also the size of some of our projects. So some of our projects have really escalated in capacity, and that's meant that the way that we bring our teams together, the way that we kind of connect people, we've had to think really carefully about. And so that second moment of pause, I don't think it happened as starkly in terms of everything stopping, but it was a moment of pause in transit, I suppose, a moment of pause, realisation, and then kind of moving forwards again.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. Ben, what about you with this forced moments that we've had? How have you used them? Were you pausing with hope, or were you pausing with despair, or was it a mixture of all of it? What was it for you?
I think it was definitely a mixture of the two. Sometimes both at the same time somehow. More so at the beginning of the year, it was definitely pausing with despair, but it was trying to make sure, unfortunately, it didn't look like things were going to get much better very quickly. So it was then trying to work out what to do next, and it was sitting down and having those kind of meetings with myself, I guess, kind of working out what's my action plan for 2020, because it will be very different, so I need to adapt to that. And then because of that, it meant I was able to kind of get some hope. And then as the year went on, my pauses definitely turned from despair to pauses of hope, kind of thinking, this might actually be working. I love that phrase, you just have a meeting with yourself. I think that's totally right. And actually, as leaders, we need to regularly just say, do I need to have a meeting with myself at the moment just to talk this through? So that's brilliant. So I want us just to explore in our podcast this month the concept of pause. So quite often we just think that pausing is just about stopping, or mindfulness, or reflection. But actually, for me, as I've looked on this and reflected on pause, for me there are 6 elements I want us to explore together, because what I want our listeners to perhaps explore too is actually what's the pause for you, which pause works for you, but equally which pause do you need at this moment, because sometimes we can just think it's one thing, and see the power and benefit of each of these pauses depending when they're needed. So for me, what pause allows us to do is to regain. And so that's a nice little acrostic. You'll know me, Lauren. It's either got to alliterate or have an acrostic, or kind of all have the same letter or something. But so for me, it's about regain. And the first one, the R, is reflection. And this is moments when we stop, when we perhaps journal our thoughts, consider our situation, consider our behaviours, and maybe reflect on how we can develop. So that can be about reflection on ourselves or reflection on the situation. And Lauren, I know, because we know each other quite well, that I know you use journaling and have a journal for reflection. So what's the power in that for you?
Well, that's a really interesting one. It's a relatively kind of new thing for me to adopt. And the reason that I journal is, you'll know that in our coaching sessions, I've asked you that, how do you define success? What does it mean to be successful? And so I journal for a very specific reason. And what I journal are moments of success, moments where I feel personally or professionally successful, so that I can help to kind of define that for me. And there's been 2 things. The first is just the act of journaling raises your awareness of the thing that you're journaling about. But the second thing is, often what you record is not what you necessarily think you were going to record. It's a really helpful exercise to give you a kind of window, I suppose, a shop window into what your life looks like through the power of journaling. So I don't journal at any great length. It's not particularly beautiful, and probably I wouldn't win any points for handwriting, but certainly it's something that I find really useful to capture those moments for a very specific purpose. And I do a little bit of journaling too. I have a book that I note these things down. I use it often to reflect on situations and how did I deal with that situation, did I change to make. And it's interesting you saying about what you end up writing isn't necessarily what you thought would come out, but it also then it becomes like a mirror that you can look back on and go, is that actually what I feel or think then? And it's a real good kind of mirroring of it as well. So in terms of impact for you then, what do you think the impact of you reflecting, and in your case by journaling, that actually does? I think because I have a very specific purpose for journaling, what it helps me to do is to, in a broader sense, kind of define success. So by capturing moments where I feel personally and professionally successful, I'm able to look at the trends across that and really drill down into what it means, what success means for me and for us as an organisation. And I think probably that the other impact of that pause, that moment of reflection, is it allows me to recreate it. And if you can capture something and define it and really understand it, then you have a greater chance at recreating those moments. So for example, I know that personally, one of the times that I feel successful is when I'm with my family. And if I'm with my family and I can create more time and space where I'm with them and I'm really truly present, then actually I'm more successful more often.
So what you're talking about there is that journal allows you to filter what you're thinking down to its essence, almost like the scientists getting to the core essence that you then know you can use and actually, this is the thing I need to apply. So that's
absolutely
brilliant. Yeah, great, fantastic. So that's reflection. It could be through journaling. You and I both journal. We use it slightly differently, and as you say, it doesn't have to be long. It can be short. It doesn't have to. It's just between you and the journal, isn't it?
A meeting with yourself.
Yeah, a meeting with yourself, exactly as Ben described earlier. Only this time you write it down, and it's interesting. Some of the research and the thinking around this is actually by writing it actually helps you to make it more concrete, to be able to reflect on it, like you've just talked about. So there is real power. But I mean, you don't have to journal to reflect, do you? Sometimes you can literally be in a moment, just think, hang on, how did I deal with that? What worked so well? What didn't? I need to just adjust that. And so it can be those fleeting moments of pause for reflection as well, can't it?
Absolutely. And a really good example of that is when you pause to prepare. And pausing to prepare is really important when you're about to have a challenging conversation. And I have far too many of those in the course of my working week. But actually that pause to prepare allows you exactly that. What have I learned that I can pull forwards? And lots of the kind of cognitive science around metacognition and self-regulation looks at exactly that. What have I learned? How can I apply that here? How will that shape the way that I respond to this? And in doing so, definitely those moments of pausing to prepare, if you like, which is a totally different sort of pause, have ensured that perhaps my challenging conversations, not always, but have generally been more successful than they might have been.
Yeah, and it's interesting you're talking there. As I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, we're thinking about this as individuals pausing for reflection, but actually you can do that as a group, as a team as well, or within a meeting, within a conversation, just go, hang on, should we just pause there? How do we feel this is going? What's working well in our interaction, or what's working well as a team here? That pause and then reflect on how this is working to then make it even better, again, can have real power, so that you continue with the energy and get it right. And if it actually something's heading in the wrong track, you can stop and then get it in the right track. Brilliant. So our next pause is energize, and Ben, I'm going to kick off with you on this one. So these are the things that energize us. So we pause what we are doing, and we then do something that will energize us, and that can range from exercise, it could just be rest, it could be mindfulness, and so I know for me, actually, ironic, I wouldn't have thought I'd be saying this, but 2 years ago I started running. So actually, running is something that I use to pause what I would normally do to energize me. You might say looking at me at the end as some kind of fluorescent, sweaty T-Rex running around the village that I live in. You wouldn't say that's perhaps particularly good to energise me or anybody else by the end of it, but it does. It energises me because it's a break from what I would normally do. But it doesn't have to be exercise. It could be rest. It could be mindfulness. Ben, what is it for you that you do to pause in the busyness to energise you?
So for me, I'm an extrovert, so ironically, the thing that energizes me is definitely not kind of pausing and doing absolutely nothing. If I do that, I just kind of, it makes things worse. So going and kind of meeting up with friends, going and filming something that isn't work, so something that I'm passionate about. So I've really recently started doing vlogs on YouTube. So I'm doing a video a day, and that for me gives me points throughout my day where I can just kind of go away with my creativity and film something fun, and that gives me these little pockets of energization throughout the day. So it's going out and doing something I love with as many people as I can.
Yeah. So what's really interesting there is you're talking about, ironically, because your job is media, ironically though, your pause to energize is still around media, but it's not work related. There's not a time frame. There's not a specific. It's just you can explore and be creative with it. And actually, you've also talked about stuff with people, which obviously is, okay, your job involves people, but it's with a different purpose, and it's just to enjoy and to be in the moment of it. That's fantastic. Lauren, what about you? What do you do that energizes you? What's the pause to energize for you?
Like you, I'm a runner, and running has been
Let me just clarify, I'm not a runner.
Well, okay.
But thank
You're
you.
a sweaty T-Rex.
You're a runner, I'm a sweaty
snail.
T-Rex. Yeah.
I love running, and it's always been a feature of my life. It's what I do for well-being. It's how I de-stress. It's how I kind of decompress. But it's also really important processing time for me. And so any form of exercise, whether that's a game of squash, I love weightlifting, and that I find really energizes me. It's the kind of challenge, and I suppose the other aspect of that is learning. And I take great energy from being around people who I can learn from, and whether that's in real life or through remote working or through books or videos or research, that for me is a real energizer.
Yeah, that's good, and we will come on to that one particularly. That's another one of the items, that specific aspect, but you've got a blend of that. So I know from chatting to you that you go running and sometimes listen to a podcast, and that's something I do as well. And ironically, I'm sometimes running out the village going, no, I disagree with you. And anybody seeing me is just thinking, who are you disagreeing with? Yourself while you're running? So yeah, you can combine the two, can't you?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you just look like a mad sweaty T-Rex in my case, talking to yourself and disagreeing with somebody on it. So that's brilliant. Okay, so our third one is gratitude. So pausing for gratitude, and this regular stopping to count the things to be thankful for. Actually, I think it's really important. There's some really interesting research around thankfulness and the importance of thankfulness. So you guys will know that when people get stressed, they release cortisol. They've done some research that when you spend some moments in thankfulness, it releases another hormone, which they've shortened to DHEA because it's got such a really long name.
I'd like you to tell me exactly what that name is.
I can't even. It's just so long. It's like one of these Welsh town names that you can't even say. And it's certainly, for those of us who know about education, phonics check would be quite amazing for it. But anyway, thankfulness releases DHEA, and DHEA combats cortisol, so that actually then reduces the stress hormone, then potentially allows you to kind of think more creatively and problem solve. So thankfulness is quite important, but how much time do we spend pausing for thankfulness and to be grateful? So Ben, let's just have a little moment of it now. What are you thankful for this year? In one sense, when we were talking through stuff, you'd perhaps had the tougher year in sense of really changing. So are you thankful, or is it just, are you thankful for anything this year?
I think I'm I think I'm thankful for the opportunity to pause. I think if this year had gone ahead the way it was, I would say meant to, I guess, I think it would have ended up being a really busy year, and actually it would have been my first proper year kind of doing what I do, but because it's been somewhat quieter, it's meant I've been able to pause and kind of make sure that I'm doing things the way I want to be doing them, so that I don't start kind of on the wrong foot, and so that everything is kind of going the way I'd like it to go. I think I'm thankful for the opportunity to pause and make sure I'm starting things properly.
Yeah, and that's quite a good reframing of things, isn't it? Because you could look at a year like 2020 and then just go, oh, this was a right ploppy year. But actually, and particularly as you saw it mapped out of having quite a nice steep curve of work coming in, but actually been able to reframe this and say, okay, so I didn't get the steep curve, but what I did get was opportunity to reflect in an early part of my business starting, and that's allowed you to reflect on what's working well, what needs to be developed. So that's really good. So Lauren, what is it? Anything you're thankful for this year?
Certainly, lots, I think. In the midst of a year where I've seen a number of colleagues and friends whose businesses have really struggled, obviously I'm really thankful for the fact that we've continued to grow and strengthen, against all odds. But that wouldn't be possible without having a really brilliant team behind me. And I'm absolutely blessed to have great people around me who challenge my thinking and who are able to kind of flex and adapt at a moment's notice. And then on a personal level, I suppose I'm very fortunate to live near the sea. And throughout lockdown, we visited the beach every day. My children grew up through a summer of being in the woods and on the beach. So I think sometimes it's easy to be thankful for the wrong things, and it's perhaps the smaller things in life that we're really blessed by.
Yeah, and then it's being thankful for where you live, isn't it? And the opportunity,
absolutely.
And then again being able to reframe. Yeah, actually, that part of life is really tough, but actually this has just given some great opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant.
Yeah, and I share some of those things as well. Thankful that actually work's come through, thankful as you then reflect that's been able to flex, and again thankful for like where I live. I don't live by the sea, but I live by some beautiful countryside, and walks and time with the family again is really, really important. But what about this pause for regular pause for reflection of thankfulness? Do either of you do that, or is that not one that you dip into?
I think in the past I'd never do that. Probably mainly because of my mental health. I couldn't pause for thankfulness because I wasn't thankful for anything. There kind of wasn't much point. But as kind of things have got better and stuff, I've definitely found myself doing it more, trying to make sure at the end of the day I find something to be thankful for, more so now that I've been doing these kind of daily videos and releasing them to the world. I worked out quite quickly, if I don't try and find good bits of the day and then like show that I have had a good day, people are going to get really bored of seeing someone kind of just moan for 4 minutes. So it's I think it's definitely something I've started to do now, and it's definitely helped as well. It has made a massive difference.
So would you say, I mean, you've just shared something quite honest with us and the listeners, Ben, in terms of mental health, meant at times that it's been hard to be thankful, but you found yourself doing that more. Has that helped with mental health? Has that been part of helping with that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think they kind of went side by side. I think because my mental health got better, I was able to pause and kind of think of some things to be thankful for. But equally, because I did the exercise of pausing to think of something to be thankful for, my mental health got better. I do think it made a difference. And I think kind of thinking of 2020 being a pretty naff year for most people, that's something that I was reading something the other day where it was, make sure that you end 2020 well, because that's what you're going to remember. It's thinking of those thankful things, and then that will outweigh all the negatives, even if there's only one thankful thing. Yeah,
brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. Lauren, what about you? Do you pause regularly for thankfulness?
Yes, definitely, on a kind of personal level, but professionally also. And I think as a group, we are deeply privileged to serve the communities that we serve in education and more broadly. And every time we work with a school or a trust or a kind of wider organisation, we all take a moment to reflect on what a privilege it is to do that job. And I think that's about having the right people around you and about having the right ethos of servitude. But more broadly, recognising that if you're not doing something that makes you feel thankful, then you're probably doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting as you're saying that. I was thinking, I do regularly just have those little moments after perhaps I've done a coaching session or done some training, just to reflect on what went well, and I do, and there's that sense that energises you again. So that pause for gratitude and thankfulness of how a session's gone, or the kind of feedback that you've had maybe from somebody, again, can just remind you of what you're good at. And that's important, isn't it? You know, when someone says to you, like for you, Ben, actually that was a really great video, just to stop and go, oh yeah, it was, wasn't it, for these reasons. And that pausing for gratitude for what you're doing, how it's going, things that have come your way can be, really energizing again, isn't it, in terms of that?
Yeah, definitely.
Brilliant. Okay, so our fourth one of the six is pausing for awe. And that's spelled awe, A-W-E, this sense of stopping to recognise the things that are working and are going sweetly or well, both, might be in the way our organisations are working, but also that pause for awe in our world, the pausing for the joy of a beautiful sunset, or, so that's interesting, actually. I wonder, Lauren, actually, I'm going to start with you. You talked about the beach, and I know you have some hobbies around the beach. I mean, do you ever pause for awe whilst you're doing any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have grown up in a family of avid sailors, and so my kind of happy place, if you like, is on the water.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure there's anywhere you can feel a greater sense of awe than when you have the sails up and you are drifting off out to sea, hopefully in the right direction, propelled by the wind and a bit of your kind of initiative, and recognising the beauty in the natural world around us. That's definitely a sense of awe. I think that the other two areas that are easy to find awe in are children, and I regularly take a deep sense of awe and sometimes a little despair with my own children. And for me, one of my kind of real passions is teaching children to read. I believe it's one of our greatest moral imperatives to unlock children's worlds through teaching them to read. And as a professional, being able to help groups of teachers, help groups of children to learn something that genuinely will shape their life is something I find awe-inspiring. Watching the moment the child can decode a word and work out what it says and take some meaning from it is like no other. So, I suppose my hobbies absolutely are part of my kind of origins of awe, if you like. But also my family, my children, and those of others. And professionally, you have to have something that makes you feel that sense of awe. Otherwise, what drives you? Yeah.
And since you're talking about family, you can imagine that all coming together, walking through the woods or along the seashore with the family, with the view, and that sense of just being together, and then that moment, isn't it, of just enjoyment and beauty in what you see and what you're experiencing, and that sense of pause in that awe. As leaders, so often we're just rushing around doing stuff, aren't we? And particularly if things come at us fast and furious, and just taking those moments of awe can be so replenishing.
Absolutely.
Ben, what about you? Do you pause for moments of awe?
Yeah, absolutely. I think because of the nature of my job, I'm often out filming kind of a beautiful sunset, or never a sunrise, I'll be honest. I'm never up that early, but definitely kind of sunsets or beautiful scenery or beautiful views. And there's often times where I'll just pause and put down the camera and just look in awe. There's a brilliant scene from a film called I think it's The Life of Walter Mitty, and it's he's a photographer for a journal company, journalism, and he's tasked with going to take a photo of like a white snow leopard, and they're super duper rare. And actually, when he finally finds the leopards, he doesn't take the photo. He just watches in awe and puts the camera down. And I think that kind of inspired me for sure to just my job is to capture everything, but sometimes it's better to pause in awe and so I definitely do that a lot.
There's a phrase, just as you've said that, I think I just want to repeat it, which is sometimes just put the camera down. Now, and as you said that, it just reminded me, sometimes you'll see people at pop concerts or something, all holding their phones recording it, and you're just thinking, just put your phone down actually for that moment and just see it with your eyes rather than see it through there. And maybe that's a reminder to all of us to sometimes just put the camera down and just sit in the moment of it and feel it and explore it rather than just watch it through a screen, because you can watch it through the screen later, but you can't gain that sense of just being in it at that moment, can you? So that's brilliant. Thank you. So our fifth one, we're heading towards the end because we know there's 6 letters in Regain. So our fifth one is inspire, and inspire is about those moments of reading, moments of listening or watching to inspire our thinking. And you'll know I've talked before about inspire to inspire, and Trevor Waldock kind of taught me that you need those moments of breathing in order to then inspire others, and it's important we're constantly replenishing our thinking. So what is it for you, Lauren? What are the things that you do to pause in order to inspire? What are your sources for this?
So I think the word pause is misleading, because pause indicates stopping, and those people who know me will know I very, very rarely stop for anything other than a little bit of sleep occasionally. But that doesn't mean that I don't pause. I think sometimes pausing is about doing something different. And Trevor Waldock, in one of your previous podcasts, talks about creating balance by turning your heart's attention to the thing that you want to rebalance in your life. And I suppose for me, that's a really good definition of pause. So in terms of inspiring, I don't necessarily pause and stop, but I pause and turn my attention to things that will give me a break or a rest from the thing that I do a lot of. So I read avidly. Whenever I have 5 minutes, I am permanently attached to a book, walking up and down the stairs, in the bath, at night, on the sofa. And I use that as an opportunity to inspire. And I also use it as an opportunity to challenge my own thinking, and you can only do that if you stop what you're doing, because otherwise you are too engrossed with the completion or execution of the thing that you're trying to get off your list to stop and ask yourself, well, why do we do what we do in the way that we do? But most importantly, what if I did this a bit differently? So I think the inspiration for me is the ability to read. I listen to lots of podcasts. I am an avid listener of the Leadership Lounge podcast.
Excellent little plug there within the Leadership Lounge. Brilliant. That's my running fodder at the weekends, and It's nice to know that I'm running fodder to you.
You are running fodder. And some of the Leadership Lounge podcasts I've listened to 3, 4, 5 times to really help me distill the essence of what it is that you're saying. And that's the same with whatever I listen to or read. And I think perhaps inspiring for me is as much about turning my attention to something different as it is about stopping the thing that's de-energizing me. Yeah.
So pause is about putting that thing on pause and removing your attention to that. Pause doesn't necessarily mean stop. Brilliant. Okay. So with this pausing for inspire, Ben, you told me a while ago that you make notes when you've kind of got this piece of learning that you've kind of come across. Talk to me a little bit about that, so the listeners can hear what you do there.
Well, I think so. For me, I'm quite a visual learner. I learn through doing. There we go. So if there's something in a podcast, or for example, if I'm editing one of your videos and kind of something stands out to me, I'll make a note of it, and then I love to create some sort of graphic, whether that's through making all the writing wibbly wobbly with some kind of fun little pictures or anything like that, and that just kind of helps it stick in my head a little bit more.
So it's just noting it, and because of your creative side you create an art around it to help that embed for you. But there's this sense that when you discover something, like you say, it might be from a video, It's nice to know that it's one of ours as well. That you just make a note of it, you create an art around it, and you just take that moment to make a note of it, so that it's something that's really helpful, I think, for some of our listeners who perhaps aren't necessarily into listening to huge things or reading big books or whatever. There's different ways. So for Lauren, it's the listening, for the podcast, it's the reading. I have to say that's the same for me. But for you, it's a little snippet that you just then make a note of. And so this pause to inspire actually doesn't have to be a big long pause either, does it? It can just be that moment and doing it in a way that suits you. Yeah, brilliant. So we're on to the last pause, which is the last one is now, and then after we've done the now, we're then going to have draw the podcast to a close for our top tip. And this pause for now is all about that stopping, that noting of the senses around you. And the benefit of that is just giving the mind a bit of a break, and take control back of everything that's going on, and control back of you. There's an author, a guy called Tony Schwartz, who writes, human beings perform best and are most productive when they alternate between periods of intense focus and intermittent renewal. And I think the mind isn't necessarily built for constantly going on one thing. It's like running an engine fast without stopping. I just think that's not particularly helpful for our minds. So, Ben, you're an entrepreneur, you've started a business, it can be stressful. Do you have moments when your mind and your body is buzzing, and do you take times for pause for the now, for any form of mindfulness?
Well, I think unfortunately the moments where my mind and body is buzzing is when I'm trying to sleep. So that is always when I'm kind of like, I've just got so many ideas going through my head. So often there's nothing I can do to stop that other than getting up and kind of scribbling them down on a piece of paper, or usually writing them down on my phone, and then kind of the next morning, maybe over breakfast or whilst I'm waiting for my coffee to brew, I'll kind of go back through that, and I guess that's then when I'll pause to reflect on maybe some of those ideas. Yeah.
And do you use any form of mindfulness? You've talked about the mind buzzing a bit, or whatever. Do you do that? Yeah, so
I think often I'll listen. So I'm a Christian, so I often find worship music really helps, or any music to be fair, but for me worship music does the trick quite nicely. So I'll often listen to that, or I'll pray, and that will help achieve that kind of mindfulness. It will clear my head a little bit, and it almost gives it kind of like a hard reset, as it were. It kind of, you're turning it on and off again so that it will hopefully be a little less buzzy. Yeah, great, thank you. And I guess for our listeners, we'll all come from different perspectives, won't we? And for you have a faith perspective, so for you, that's where that reflection around mindfulness is rooted. For others, they might not have that same belief system as you, but for them, it's still perhaps finding maybe the power of just stopping and reflecting and being mindful for them. I think if you don't have that faith, for me it's worship music, but it doesn't have to be. So it could just be classical music or something mellow, or it's pausing. And I think for me the point of praying is it's having that conversation, but instead of having a meeting with myself, I'm kind of having a meeting with God, as it were. But have a meeting with yourself, like that would do the trick quite nicely as well. It's discussing it, and because it gets it off your chest, so that, like when I'm writing it down on my phone, it means it's not kind of not as busy anymore, because you've dealt with it, and you can kind of go back to it the next day. Brilliant, thank you, Ben. What about you, Lauren? For me, do you use any form of mindfulness? Is there any power or benefit in it?
I'm not sure you would call it mindfulness, but I think when we're busy, we're disempowered. And I think being disempowered is frightening, because we feel like we have no control. And what moments of pause mean is that we can become re-empowered. So I read a research study that had been completed, some time ago, that looked at the effect of standing like Wonder Woman. Bear with me.
Yes, no, I think I've read a similar thing, and yeah, that is, yeah.
So this study basically tested the saliva of quite a large sample of people before and after they had stood like Wonder Woman, and the whole idea was that in this moment you feel re-empowered, and that kind of pause, if you like, will become, exactly as Ben says, a reset button. And what they found was that in these 2 minutes of standing like Wonder Woman, the levels of cortisol dropped and the levels of testosterone increased. And afterwards, people felt more empowered. So I can't honestly say that I go through every day standing like Wonder Woman for 2 minutes a day. But that notion of kind of doing something, pausing to re-empower, that nowness of being present and pausing and reflecting, but also rejuvenating and moving yourself into the next part of your day or the next part of your week, I think probably is the equivalent to other people's mindfulness, maybe.
So, but my big question, Lauren, is, do you, on occasions, stand like Wonder Woman?
Actually, I do, Colin, and what's more, it's not just me that does it.
Okay.
So I have a rather wonderful team around me, and I have a brilliant operations lead, Ali, who leads a small team of logistics and ops staff, as well as having the joyful job of managing my diary and the diary of all of our consultants. And Ali is an avid follower of the standing like Wonder Woman faith. So yeah, definitely there's a place for it. You should try it.
Well, I feel I will. But it's interesting you say it's not just you. I had this image that your family would all be standing around doing that as well. But I can rest assured that your husband is not standing like
on
Wonder
occasions, Ali and I have been known to stand in the same office and stand like Wonder Woman
Excellent.
for a couple of minutes.
Yeah, so there you go. For we have a range of options on this podcast that you can take for this just pausing for now and just that reset button. So that's brilliant. Good. And if you are just listening to this podcast, I'd just like to say that none of us are in any form of superhero costumes. We're in normal day-to-day clothing. Good. So we've come to that time, that sad moment of drawing our podcast, our Leadership Lounge podcast, to a close. But just before we do, we have to have that moment where you share your top tip. And so it's just sharing one thing that maybe we want our listeners to go away with around the power of pause. What element is it that you want to share? So Ben, if we start with you, Ben's now got, why don't we start with the other person?
I knew you were going to ask this as well.
Give me some more thinking time. But Ben, what is it for you? Do you have a top tip for our listeners around the power of pause?
I think it's quite easy if you're busy to think, I don't have time to pause. Now it's a bit of a naff top tip, but my top tip is to just do it. And I'm not trying to coin Nike's sort of a slogan there, but do it. And it doesn't have to be an hour or 2 minutes, or it can literally just be 30 seconds just to kind of visualize a checklist in your head and then tick every single thing off. And make sure that what you're visualizing is things that you can tick off, because then that will just make you feel so much better, because you'll have succeeded on all these things, even if it's brush my teeth, check, had my breakfast, check, went for my run, stood like Wonder Woman, kind of check. And it's just doing it, like, because if you don't, nothing's going to change. Yeah,
I love that, and I love the thing where you said, we sometimes think I can't afford to do this. Actually, we can't afford not
to.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Ben. Lauren, what about you? You've had a bit of thinking time now because Ben went first. So what's your top tip around the power of pause?
Other than stand like Wonder Woman, I think probably there's a notion, isn't there, that when we want people to slow down and we can see that they're too busy, we want them to stop. And actually that's really unhelpful. And when people say to me, just stop it, just sit down, that's deeply unhelpful.
That's caging a tiger.
I'm not sure I'm a tiger, Colin. But I suppose it's the recognition that pause doesn't mean to stop. Sometimes it means to change. And if we change what we're doing and we change our focus and we move our attention to the thing that will rebalance us, I suppose what it offers us the opportunity to do is to do things differently. So my kind of top tip, and I think it's grim to ask your guests for a top tip, by the way. My top tip would be to recognise that pause doesn't mean to stop. Sometimes it means to change. But also to make sure that your pause is purposeful. Because there's nothing more irritating to me than any time spent not being purposeful. And so use that time to reflect or to re-energise or to inspire or to take awe. But make the time, as Ben says, and make it purposeful.
Brilliant, thank you, really good. And seeing as just the three of us, I don't have a third guest, so I'm going to share one as well. And I think it's about find the pause that works for you, and find the pause that you need in that moment as well. Because sometimes there'll be natural ones that we have. But also there's sometimes in this moment you need a specific type of pause. Maybe it's the thankfulness, maybe it's the reflection, whichever you need at that moment. So find the pause that works for you and find the pause that you need in this moment. So good. Thank you ever so much to my wonderful guests, to Lauren Meadows and Ben Land in our Leadership Lounge podcast for our Power of Pause. It's been great to have you with us today. Thank you for sharing, and thank you to our listeners as well for listening in and joining us on the Leadership Lounge, and we look forward to you joining us again for another podcast next month. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having me, Colin.
Thank you very much.